On behalf of the Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Impact and Policy Research Institute, TERI School of Advanced Studies, and India Water Portal, I extend my warm welcome to episode 13 of the State of the Environment, #Planet Talks with me, Simi Mehta. This discussion series is specifically curated to serve as a platform for transdisciplinary exchange of insights and to foster the convergence of natural and social sciences so as to generate greater awareness and produce knowledge on the environment of past, present, and future with an eye on sustainable development. So when we think of the phenomenon of floods, what comes to our minds, whether as a lived experience or as a perspective, is that of a scary picture that results out of the human beings trespassing of their boundaries, encroaching the natural floodplains, and threatening all the living species on those floodplains. This fear is further exacerbated by the advance and retreat of polar ice caps in the recent centuries towards the coastal plains. However, if we see historically and in the natural, floods have been instrumental in creating huge varieties of habitats like backwaters, ponds, etc., leading to assemblages of a huge diversity of rich biodiversity of microbial organisms. These have also been responsible for civilization. And in fact, the oldest form of agriculture, the flood retreat agriculture, was made possible by flooding of rivers. So essentially, floods are not disturbances. And in the words of Professor James C. Scott, who's the author of the book In Praise of Floods, In Praise of the Floods, the study of rivers and civilization, floods are actually mosaics of more biodiversity. It is the prevention of these natural perturbations, which is actually a disturbance, which is imminent from various forms of human engineering. Hence, it is important to take a step back and to introspect with all rationality about where we have gone wrong and about what yielded to excesses on the nature. And if this remains an area of ignorance, then we will not only see mounting losses to innocent civilians, but also we'll see more and more disturbing pictures coming in the future. For such an introspection and more, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Rohan D Souza, who would be taking us through a reflective ride on should we bet more on historians and less on engineers to sort out India's challenges of flooding. It is my honor to introduce to you Dr. D Souza, who's joining us from Japan. Dr. D Souza is an associate professor at the Graduate School of Asian and African Area Studies at Kyoto University. He has earned his PhD from the Center for Historical Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where he was also elected as the General Secretary during his student days at the Jawaharlal Nehru University's Students' Union from the platform of All India Students Federation, AISF. Dr. D Souza has held postdoctoral and visiting fellowships at prestigious universities like the Yale University, UC Berkeley, University of Pennsylvania, Australian National University, and is also affiliated with the Center for World Environmental History at University of Sussex. Dr. D Souza was the short-term chair at the University of Tokyo in Japan as visiting professor of contemporary Indian studies. He is the author of the famous book, Drowned and Damned, Colonial Capitalism and Flood Control in Eastern India. He has also co-edited the book on the British Empire and Natural World, Environmental Encounters in South Asia, jointly with Deepak Kumar and Vinita Damodran. Dr. D Souza has also edited the Environment, Technology and Development, Critical and Subversive Essays for the Economic and Political Weekly. His major areas of research and publications cover the themes in environmental history, political ecology, sustainable development, and modern technology. With these few words, Dr. D Souza, we are delighted and grateful that you could join us today. I welcome you to make your presentation. Thank you very much, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mehta, for a very generous introduction and for also, I think, a great insight in your introductory comments on floods. So I think my talk will actually be a elaboration of what you've outlined at the start. All right, by just giving perhaps a little more system to those observations. So I'm going to start, but before I start, I just want to say that the points I have to make are very large and involves a lot of time. But I'm told I've got about 20 minutes. So the talk is mostly schematic and intended to really set the terms for a conversation, which I believe will happen after my presentation. So bear with me. There will be lots of aspects that will perhaps uh, not be fleshed out in my presentation, but hopefully when the questions come to me, I will have opportunity to explain them. Yeah. So please bear with me. I'm always told that a short presentation is very good because it keeps your attention fresh and flagged. And later on in the questions, one can take as much time as possible. Okay, so I'm going to share a PowerPoint, and then from there, we will move on. Simi will, Dr. Mehta will tell me whether I have
Yes,
correctly, okay,
yes,
and I have
yes.
to put the cup on
Yeah,
for this,
right,
and I have to display settings. I have to do swap, right? Okay,
right.
all right,
Perfect.
right. So my presentation today is somewhat provocatively positioned in the sense that I'm arguing that will historians uh, be, I mean, should we depend on the way historians think about environments and how their methodologies of understanding the past and the world, will that be more helpful than the current dependence that we have on a certain kind of engineering? Yeah, when it comes to the question of flood challenges for India today. Now, that having been said, uh, in a title like that, I have to explain what it means to be an engineer, and I have to then explain what it means to be a historian and why there are different competencies have to be understood when we're thinking of what we mean by floods. So let me go to the first slide. In the most conventional sense, um, engineers are supposed to be problem solvers. Yeah, but they in their effort to solve problems, they bring a certain kind of unique ability, and that is they turn science into a tool that is used then to put nature to work. I want to focus a little bit on this definition, that they solve problems by turning science into a tool that puts nature to work. Okay. Now, why is that important to say that science is a tool? Is because scientists and the more philosophical and the way we understand science is that science is study of nature. All right. It's not necessarily turning it into a tool because we want to put nature to work. All right. So that distinction has to be kept in mind. Scientists and engineers, though they do draw upon the notion of science, I want to underline that engineers tend to draw on science in a very different way. They turn it into a tool because they want to put nature to work. All right. Now, given that, I want to underline a definition which is very helpful for my discussion today. And I draw upon one Professor Peter Lipton, who's passed away, unfortunately, a historian and philosopher of science, Cambridge University. And in one of his essays on the philosophy of engineering, there's a very compelling discussion, which I thought was very helpful. He says, engineering is about building artifacts by possessing the know-how, that is the skills to do it, to do so, but without, and this is the most important part, but without always having the ability to choose the problem. Now, this is a very significant aspect about engineers, though they make artifacts and they have unique set of unique skill set to build bridges, trains, cars, trams, whatever. But as they solve problems, they don't always have the ability to choose the problem. And why is that? That's because mostly governments or industry or a range of decision makers choose the problem for them and set engineers to solve them. Yeah. So you have a you have to understand a very critical aspect of engineering. One is that it brings in science as a tool because it wants nature to work, but then it doesn't always get the opportunity to choose the problem that it has to solve. Yeah, it's a very important distinction, and I'll elaborate that as I get into this discussion. Now, for historians, on the other hand, um, again, I can be accused of drawing on someone who's quite outdated and old-fashioned, but very helpful if you want to get across the idea of history in the most basic sense. Because today, it's very fascinating today that you get claims about the internet 8,000 years ago or plastic surgery 5,000 years ago. People tend to see history in fairly surprising and stunning ways today. So I want to really, for the practitioners, I mean, for the historian today, and for those steeped in a certain belief about history being something based on reason and rationality and evidence and so on and so forth, we draw upon a kind of shall we say a historical tradition that is not fanciful, but really based on evidence and facts and interpretation and so on and so forth. So if you go by that version of history, E.H. Carr continues to have some very compelling relevance today. And so he offers a very compelling definition. He says, my first answer, therefore, to the question, what is history? This is 1961, is that it is a continuous process of interaction between the historian and his facts, an unending dialogue between the present and the past. Okay. What is significant, I mean, E.H. Carr has been criticized at many levels, and I won't get into that right now here. But what is significant is that E.H. Carr was able to tell us that facts and interpretation actually have a kind of relationship in which it's not that that the historian just goes out looking for facts, or that the interpretation is affected by the facts they collect. He makes a good case to argue that whatever your interpretation is, there are certain kinds of facts that will be made available to you. So he talks about how you take a boat and how deep you go is where you catch the fish, right? So shallow waters is certain kinds of fish, deeper you go, certain other kinds of fish. So your interpretation defines, decides, enables you to collect facts in specific ways. But also, on the other hand, it's not that only your interpretation will shape your facts, but facts can also surprise you. You might get a shark sometime in the shallow water, so on and so forth, yeah, so to speak. But what I want to underline here is that it's a two-way process. Interpretations shape facts, facts shape interpretations, yeah? Now, in saying this, what I want to get at is that, since E.H. Carr, there's been huge number of turns, and this is not the forum in which we discuss the strengths and weaknesses of postmodernism, post-structuralism, cultural history, economic. I mean, there's a huge reworking. I want to focus on history at the research level that is still expected from the standard history student. And they're expected to do two things. One is they are supposed to establish the provenance of the sources. Now, what that means is that we have to establish that these sources are valid and correct for the questions that we're asking. So I would not be perhaps studying Napoleon if I was working on the history of cricket in India, right? No matter how many original documents that Napoleon had written about politics or sport or whatever, it's highly unlikely that impossible that he would have thought about cricket. Yeah. So whenever you use a source, you have to establish the credibility and the validity of that source for the arguments you're making, and that's one of the most important aspects of the historian at the research level, that they bring in new sources and establish why these sources are important and credible for the arguments being made, right? Now that's one aspect of the historian's task. The second is the historian must separate the present and past, must separate time, really. So I cannot really sit down here today and say when Ashoka's cell phone number was 986 whatever 342 whatever. You know, it's impossible. Ashoka, the great emperor of ancient India, or Akbar or Aurangzeb. I can't say that we didn't have. I mean, where's their cell phone numbers, right? Because this is it must recognize that concepts and categories relevant to today cannot simply be projected into the past. That in order to talk about the past, we must grasp it in terms of the categories and concepts that are relevant and that are helpful and yield to us a proper understanding of the past. Yeah. So if you look at these two dimensions of history at research level, you can quickly arrive at a certain understanding that historians at the research level, especially as a craft, are problem constitutors. Remember, engineers are problem solvers. Historians are problem constitutors. What does that mean? That means that historians actually tell us what is a good problem to have, what is a valid problem to have, what is a compelling problem to have. So you can roughly say my divide is this, that engineers are problem solvers and they don't always control the problems that they're given to solve. Yeah. Historians, on the other hand, are problem constitutors. Much of what they do and the exercise they're involved in is to establish what is a good problem and a credible problem to have. Okay, so I want you to keep this in mind as I proceed in the rest of my very short lecture. So let's look at now how problem solvers think of floods. And you will often find that in much of the engineering literature and writing and discussions, floods are recorded as disaster events. That is when you get a river overflowing its channel, moving into either urban areas, moving into settled areas, damaging houses, so on and so forth. And because it's conceptualized and it's positioned as a problem, as a disaster event, engineers tend to talk in the language of flood control. They build dams to control floods, or there's discussion of flood management by using embankments. In other words, most engineers tend to view floods as something that needs to be controlled, prevented, or at best managed. Yeah, and the way they think that through is by working a great deal on prediction in order to get control. Yeah, so you have this formality of this huge number of formulas to arrive at prediction. So they look at average flows. They look at what is a high spike at a possibility of the highest flood level, and how to build the dam that can hold back that much water, concrete strength, tensile strength. There's discussions on a range of ways of control. Yeah. So in a sense, what we are having here is the problem that is constructed as one of a disaster event. You have an entire language, you have an entire set of thinkings, imaginations, and ideas about control through dams and embankments. And fundamentally, you get the engineering vision of something like this. This was a Hindustan Times report in 2020, but flood zone country, not marked in blue, but in red. And they write 75 lakh hectares land affected on average every year. This is the amount of damage, 1,805 crores and 1,600 lives on an average lost. Not 1,602 or 603, but always in rounded numbers. Yeah, because that's the average. So when you're given something like this, you can, there's an entire discourse that emerges around control, management, dams, embankments, prevention, and so on and so forth, in which this is the language that much of the engineering is invested in. Yeah. And so therefore, there's only one notion of the flood as a disaster event. Now let's look at what historians have begun to write about rivers and about floods. And I must say, no pun intended, but the last few years, there's been a flood of writings on rivers and floods, especially in India. And I must flag here Arup Jyoti Saikya's The Unquiet River, a great classic on the Brahmaputra, Sunil Amrit's Unruly Waters, and Dilip Dakuna's remarkable The Invention of Rivers. This is a real treat and joy with incredible number of figures, photographs, maps, artifacts. It's just a fantastic book in any sense. For those of you deeply invested in how a long durée history can be written of the Ganges, I think Sudipto Sen's book, wonderful. And Devjani Bhattacharya's, I think, is another absolute paradigm shift writing book, making book called Empire and Ecology. So what you can see is that a large number of historians have begun to apply themselves to understanding floods and rivers. And it is a very, very nuanced and complex engagement. Yeah. But before I actually tell you what the historians think, I should flag definitely for everyone's information, and some of you might be aware of these three very esteemed and respected public personalities, if you ask me. These are three engineers who've used history to come around to the opposite point of view of what the standard civil engineering response has been to floods. I'm talking about Dunu Roy, IIT Bombay, Dr. Dinesh Mishra, IIT Kharagpur, and Dr. Jayanto Bandyopadhyay. Interestingly enough, like historians, all three of them have written a great deal of articles, papers, pamphlets, booklets. Dinesh Mishra has written an extensive, he has an extensive set of writings on rivers in Bihar. And all three of them, there are some nuanced distinctions in the way they look at floods. But if I'm going to be very sort of limited in saying that all three of them argue that floods are not events, but they are natural fluvial processes. So it's not an event, it's a process. Okay. And what they underline repeatedly is that rivers are active geomorphologic agents, all right? And through erosion and deposition, they build up land and create ecosystems. And now here's a very important addition that they do make. And this is, though I wouldn't say that their historical treatment has been, after all, they're engineers, but it's been much of the historical treatment is very, I would say, original, compelling, and in many ways pioneering as well. All right. They have argued that historically in the South Asian subcontinent, people have a long history of adapting to floods by tapping riverine silt and mud, and for cultivation, for actually growing crops. The silt was very nurturing of the soil, and for exploiting fish habitats. Now, their notion of history is very much rhymes with what I pointed out earlier to the vast spectrum of books, which of course I do not have time to in a detailed way to discuss each book. But all these engineers clearly indicate that the history of the subcontinent indicates flood utilization rather than flood control. All right. So here's a simple map. So you have on your, I think, left-hand side, flood as event. This is the real conceptualization and the sphere in which engineers operate. Central Water Commission, Ministry of Water Resources, so on and so forth. Very much contractors, engineers, politicians. This is the way the flood has been often perceived, and they write, think, and develop theories for prediction, control, and management. But for those who think flood is a process, there's a long history of flood utilization, yeah, which is completely different, because what you want to look for is not for prediction and for control and management, but you want to look for is strategies for adaptation. So there's a clear distinction and demarcation that you can see between the two ways of thinking and acting. Now, to put it in an image, all right, this is something that I try to get across. So the engineering notion of the river pretty much looks like this. It's like cusecs plus kilowatts is equal to river. You get straight lines, very neat. And this is, for example, the Indus Basin irrigation system. It's a schematic diagram, all right? You can see the river looks like you can teach it in a geometry class, yeah? Straight lines, angles, cuts, lots of numbers, clean, neat. Now, on the other side, if it's a process, this is the image. It's like tangled web of connected streams and bodies of water, yeah? And overflow in the fluvial process is actually part of of the geomorphological process, right? So what we get is two different ways of thinking, very sharply contrasted ways of thinking. Engineers who think like reptiles, reptiles, not to run down crocodiles or whatever, but reptiles lay their eggs on land, yeah, even though they use water. So to the reptilian view, it's a river of quantities, volumes, which then can be stocked in a reservoir, while for the amphibian, it is a river of qualities. So it's a collection of flood pulses, the play of silt and mud that links different habitats. And, the more floods is actually very much part of a rhythm that connects different biological materials. So fish eggs move, fish move. It's great to get ecological connectivity because it really plays into the life worlds of the fish, yeah? A fish of muscle and fin, so to a river of muscle and fin, so to speak. However, now this debate has been going on for quite a while, and I'd say much of the historians and many of these renegade engineers like Dunu Roy and Jayanto and Dinesh Mishra. And I can add a few more. I'm thinking of Shripad Dharmadhikari and of several others who've also been, like Himanshu Thakkar, for example, who've also been arguing along similar lines, yeah, even though they're all engineers. But this debate has been going on and for quite some time in India, and it's kind of reached some kind of crescendo until recently, where we've got a huge shift in the way we are now looking at floods. And I would like to explain the word Anthropocene perhaps later in the discussions, but Anthropocene is supposed to be marking this new geological epoch. We are no longer in the previous Holocene period of 11,000 or 12,000 years, but we are now looking at climatic patterns and events that are completely different and unprecedented from human experience. Yeah. Now, this refers to, for example, Mumbai, 2005. It was a great shocker because, and I just read this here, the floods were caused by the 8th heaviest ever recorded 24-hour rainfall of 944 millimeters, that is 37.17 inches. In the next 644 millimeters, that's 25.35 inches, was received within the 12-hour period between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. I mean, no one had actually kind of grasped the implications of this. And on much of Mumbai, and actually, sorry, this slides where it's reverse. It should have been the other way around. But it really flattened Mumbai. And since 2005, Mumbai has had fairly regular hits of this kind, huge rainfall. And then, sorry, this goes on. But in 2010, a similar kind of shocking, unexpected flood in Pakistan. The floods directly affected about 20 million people, mostly by destruction of property, livelihood, and infrastructure, with a death toll of close to 2,000 people. Yeah, but the damages are long-term, and Pakistan is still recovering from some of the floods of 2010. Chennai, 2015. There's a long list, Bangkok, and so on and so forth. For example, in Chennai, according to SkyMet data, during the month of November, Chennai recorded a whopping 1,218.6 millimeters of rain, 3 times its monthly rainfall. The normal rainfall figure for November stood at 407.4 mm. And so I could get into the details. But what I'm trying to get across is that this is a kind of rainfall pattern that is unprecedented. We don't really have a sense of how to now grasp these floods. We had a familiar way, which I pointed out earlier, event and process that what do you call disagreement and differences were going on, and engineers were talking to people who were holding these historical views that look at adaptation, don't only think about predictive and prediction and control. Now, what is clear with the new floods, and to put it bluntly, is that we are losing the ability to predict, and therefore there's a loss of control. Now, this is a fundamental premise of the engineering mindset, that the better you are able to predict, the more you can control. But if you cannot predict, obviously you do not have control. So we now have to think about embracing complexity, right? And embracing complexity involves not only problem solving, but relocating in that order, in the sequence, as problem constituting. We have to learn to rethink the problem in the first place. It's no longer, okay, this is a problem, we figure out what the problem is, go out, engineers, and solve it. No, we now have to retool. And this is something that historians are good at, which I pointed out earlier, that what historians have been really good at doing is to develop methodologies to look at locality experiences, develop understandings of landscape specificities, look at contingency, chance, surprise, and certainly terms that I can, of course, explain when we get the questions. But my argument today is to argue that there are methodologies in history which actually allow us to get beyond the problem of predictability, help us deal with uncertainty and surprise, because the way that historians are trained to constitute problems. Yeah. And this problem constituting exercise, my argument is that will help us, along with problem solving exercises of the engineer, that we need to decenter the engineering vision now and develop more plural methodologies in order to tackle floods, because we no longer have prediction, and therefore we no longer have control. And historians really are equipped methodologically and otherwise to actually look at and study patterns across periods of time, and to explore issues of surprise and uncertainty. I think I've exhausted my 30 minutes or 25 minutes. So on that note, my argument, to put in a nutshell, is that we can no longer depend on the limited engineering problem-solving approach. We have to now bring in the historians who are far more trained for problem constituting exercises. Yeah, thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions. Okay. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you,
so
Smita.
much, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir. What a
very brief.
brilliant
Yeah.
presentation and giving us different insight altogether, because this is, I believe, this is not very common, or to say it is not very publicized. Maybe maybe there could be vested interests that the viewpoint or the point of view from the historian's perspective,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
historian's lens, to be able to utilize the expertise in solving such a real problem that we are now in. Because essentially, I totally agree with you that these are not events, these were the natural process. And our focus has now been on more of adaptation, that okay, now floods have occurred, so now what? Because when you show the pictures of Mumbai floods or Chennai floods or in different areas of the world, uh, those who at the suffering, I mean, those at the receiving end are the common people. They would not know what the, I mean, what have they brought unto themselves, or who has been the reason for such a situation. So, I mean, at that time and at that point, uh, it is very important to engage in, I mean, take lessons, and and then, so that we are not bringing such a um, disaster upon the people who are sort of helpless. So, if preparations begin in advance, and as you are mentioning, that it is so important to take the point of view of the historians, it, I think, there would be more predictability, which vis-a-vis the engineers, or who portray to have a scientific bent of mind, that okay, this is my this is the picture that I am understanding, and this is how things should go. This is the picture that could happen in the future, and that is how the next steps could be taken. And unfortunately, there's a lot of reliance upon the policy reliance upon this framework of thinking. So actually, what I felt personally was that your entire lecture had enormous amount of policy implications, because going ahead, we are in the era of Anthropocene, and um, I am not sure especially in the era of climate change and extreme weather events, it is all the more going to happen. These events are more and more going to happen. So
Right.
it is a good time, and of course, if there is policy interest, a good time to step back and understand the nuances of how are we going to deal with it, because otherwise it's going to be a total loss for the entire country. A
Right.
loss anywhere would eventually have cumulative disastrous implications. So uh, I would like to know from you about um, the unilateral or the biased dependency of on the engineering views from the point of view of the government for solving the problem must take the inputs from the predictability presented by the historians. So, do you think it should be an either or there has to be more of a convergence between the two? Rather, the learning experience must come from the historian's perspective, and then picture the various facets of what could happen, the possible plausible scenarios, and then move towards solutions, policy solutions. So, if you could share your views on this, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Smith. Simi, let me underline very clearly what some of the messages that I'm trying to convey. Yeah. First of all, many in India start with a kind of bias that the social sciences really cannot contribute to certain hard debates
Okay.
about growth, development, or the kind of um, uh, engineering ideas about what should be constructed and not constructed, right? So environment is seen to be for the environmentalists, which is supposed to be something to do with sciences, and engineers are people who construct stuff, and this is not the space for the social sciences. My argument really fundamentally is that the social
Okay.
sciences has a big role in helping us understand how we construct problems. This is not where our engineering is really good at. Social sciences are very good at telling you what is a good problem to have. All right. So that framing of the problem, I feel, is something that you have to include more social scientists. Let me give you an example. It's slightly a detour. I spent 1 year teaching in an engineering university, and I was a historian. And many of the young people who came there were not happy to come to my class because they were engineers. They had a very different understanding of the social sciences. They thought it was just fluff, waste of time. History is about dates and famous people. And they came to the class really to sleep. All right. So it was my job to actually provoke them. So I remember in one of the first classes, there was a sullen attitude because they had to do this, and somehow they're going to try and pass and just get it out of the way and go back to their building bridges and doing their math or whatever. So I asked him in class one day. I said, it was amongst the first class. I said, are how many of you hate politics? And all the hands went up without a single hand that was down. Everyone raised. It's like automatic. Okay, I said, okay, great. I said, okay, so all of you hate politics. How many of you love democracy? And then a few hands went up. And I said, you guys are engineers. That's a contradiction. You can't hate politics and love democracy because politics is a ingredient of democracy. It's a vital ingredient. It's like making dal without lentil. You can't do it. So from that contradiction, I kind of was able to explain to them why politics was also about values. It was not only about power and interest and money, and how democracy was the best way that we have to making sure that we listen to very different voices, right? And there wasn't always an elegant solution to things. There was sometimes a messy solution. A noisy solution is far more helpful than something that's just elegant, that geometrically elegant. So similarly, when we look at how there's been an engineering capture of the imagination of flood control and water management and river we call management as well. Yeah, the understanding is that social scientists should be kept out of this. But if you bring social science methodologies, social science perspectives, uh, historical visions into how we make policies and how we make assessments, I feel that it will lead to a far more richer understanding of a problem. Okay, because problem constituting is a very, very important aspect of problem solving. Engineering is not, as Lipton says, they don't really solve problems that they get to choose, right? So to come back again, flooding is mostly seen as an engineering problem. And if you look at recently in Bihar, it spills into the political sphere because people say, oh, the embankments, the contractor cheated on the cement. Um, the government has not been responsive enough with flood relief. And it gets wedged into politics as if the engineer has not done the job, when actually it's a far more complex engagement that's required. Yeah. So at the heart of what I'm trying to say is that we need the social sciences to come in We need a social sciences with the way that they can offer methodologies and their ideas about how the world operates. Yeah. And that is really the heart of what I'm trying to say. And especially when you have the epoch of the Anthropocene, you have climate change, where we are losing predictability. And because we don't have predictability anymore, we have lots of uncertainty. And the social sciences is much better in its diverse methodologies in tackling uncertainty and tackling loss of predictability. Okay, so that's the overall argument. And flood is one kind of extreme event that sharpens that disconnect between the social science and engineering. Again, engineering is not sciences. Please be clear. Science is a tool for engineers, right? Right? And tool because they want to make nature work. Nature by itself does not work. Okay, right? So how do you get nature? And I think, again, I'm not deprecating them. I don't, there are many wonderful and important contributions of engineering. Yeah. And India's IITs have really been cutting edge globally in the way they've built this cadre of engineers. The Nehruvian world of the IIT that was founded. It's remarkable. Such incredible engineers. However, from the 1980s, the IITs also started making social sciences irrelevant to the engineering curriculum. Suddenly, the social sciences have been steadily displaced. It has become like, just about a quiet noise in the background, right? Which no one really, the hard work will be done by all these guys who roll up their sleeves and go build a bridge, right? So my argument is that conceptually, look at the wealth of insights that history is offering us today on rivers. I mean, fabulous number of books in the last from 20. I mean, it's hard for me to keep up with some of the literature, even though my initial work was on flood control. And though I must say, the first book, the book I wrote, you were kind enough to call it famous, but actually it's quite a boring effort and quite difficult to read. And I wish I could have written it more compelling. But you look at Arupjyoti Saikia's Unquiet River, the wonderful work done by Dilip Dakuna, Devyani Bhattacharya, Sudipto Sen's magnificent, The Ganga, fantastic, and Sunil Amrit's book as well. These are absolutely fabulous. They've kind of teased out the entire complexity of the river story in India. And I wonder, why is that not part of our understanding about water and rivers? You see? And how that should feed policy is, again, a good question you flagged. Very quickly, I should end this long reply, but I was teaching in the Center for Studies in Science Policy in JNU for several years, for almost 12 years. And we had this understanding of policy. What is policy? Policy is the art of humiliating politics through good science. Policy is the art of humiliating politics through good science. Okay, right? And now you keep on defining good science. What is good science? It's different from bad science, different from just science. Yeah, and policy making only can humiliate politics because policy making doesn't really have the power of overwhelming politics. Yeah, right? So it must, at some level, put forward good science, and it's an art, how persuasive you are, how compelling you are. And I feel that it is time now for the social sciences and history in particular to step up to the plate and now be an active and muscular contribution to both policy making and to imaginations about development, adaptation to climate change impacts, and most importantly, really sorting out how exactly we constitute our problems when we do not have predictability. Yeah, I don't know if that's coming across. Yeah, right. Thank you. Right. Any more questions? I'm quite happy to respond.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Yes, I think I totally agree with you. It is time that social sciences ups its games
Yeah,
to so as to come at the table where
yeah,
actual decisions are made.
yeah,
So, yeah, so my next question to you is that there are so-called many engineering
mm,
solutions with respect to
yeah,
several agencies that are there in terms of
mm,
disaster management or even flood control. In every other incident of floods that happen, unfortunate though, they are all deputed NDRF and NDMA, and they are all there. So basically, they are created to face or to respond to such situations. Had
yeah,
such situations not been there in the first place, it would not be needed. So, but there is a lot of lack of coordination that I have observed among these agencies of flood management. And if there is a lack of coordination amongst themselves, what are they going to deliver at the ground level? For the people who are at the receiving end. And then we have seen so many recurring floods in the Terai region in throughout
mm,
parts of Bihar. You have mentioned Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, and they have all witnessed actually massive losses. So this again brings me back to the policy question that um, should uh, should the government more and more focus on having historians in historians views in such a situation, or whether it is okay to have a business as usual, because okay, perspectives would be fine from the lens of a historian, but they are not going on the ground or when the situation really happens or it really occurs. So, where do we draw a line? If, I think it is a very fine balance that has to be drawn upon. If you could, if
yeah.
I'm making
Okay.
myself clear upon this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can I just pose your question slightly? Let me see if I can pose it in the way that I can answer it. Okay, I'll reframe it. Okay, there are issues of logistics and there are issues of conceptualization. Okay, so lack of coordination can be a logistical problem. There's certain kinds of incompetent people, or the phones are not working on time, or they haven't been trained for a certain event. It's come too much of a surprise. That is, something that needs to be sorted out. The conceptualization is another domain, which I'm trying to underline again and again. That is to say that the social sciences and even historical imagination, uh, the way we conceptualize problems tend to be very different from the way um the engineering world uh, uh, accepts and solves its problems. Okay, so for example, what is the engineering that should be when you respond to floods not as an event but as a process? Now I'm just imagining it. So I'm thinking of engineers who say, okay, it's a process, it's not an event. So uh, invariably they will then arrive at the understanding that there is actually floods may be part of drainage congestion. It might be like, for example, all your rivers, in at least in the eastern, is like north to south, but all your railways and roads are east to west. Roads and railways follow power, rivers follow gravity. Okay, so you get a whole lot of clogging on that system. We've interfered, we have, completely traumatized natural flow. All right. So how to untangle that, how to think of an engineering that treats floods as process. And historians can help you assemble that idea of process. They can do village level studies, they can do drainage level studies, they can look at past records, they can talk to whole, including anthropology, sociology. In my own book, I've cited sources where British officials are saying that local communities seem to locate their villages in very strategic ways on higher ground, on bluffs, and that they have a very strong sense of a drainage line. Okay, many people do not know this, but I shouldn't put it that way. Sounds like Trump. Sorry. Many people perhaps Jean Deloche has this wonderful 2 volumes. He's a historian from French historian in Pondicherry. It's got railways, communication and railways, communications and transport and communications before the railways in India. And he looks at how before the railways came to India, there was this whole network of people using small boats, all these routes, so on and so forth. But he makes one thing very, very clear. He says, essentially, there was no war that could happen during the monsoons. No army went out. There was peace throughout the 5 or 6 months because of the monsoons. Okay, it's so dangerous to take your army out. It's only with the coming of the railways that you had 12-month warfare possible. Are you getting what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to underline is that with the railways and the emergence of modern roads, we have reworked much of the possibilities of transport and communication in this subcontinent. And there are consequences that we are still trying to grapple with, such as flooding, such as long-term damage, lives lost, deaths, yeah, so on and so forth. So historians can provide us these incredible maps of what has been changed, what can be restored, what can be engaged with. Yeah, okay. So for example, Dinesh Kumar Mishra, the engineer I mentioned, he has this idea of living with floods. Let go, destroy these embankments, let the rivers restore their regimes. Okay, a river regime. I think it's a fascinating idea, but dangerous, because if you just give up, there'll be lots of damage and lives lost. How about slowly and steadily working through conversations with engineers, historians, local communities, different people, and looking at how you can slowly begin to harness these floods and how you can adapt to their changing regimes. Yeah, even as I say this, knowing fully well that we are now dealing with new and unprecedented flooding regimes, especially in big cities. And much of this blame is now that our cities have been made too dry. They have choked their lakes. Mumbai has, narrowed its Methi River. Whether it's Banaras, whether it's Chennai, whether it's Delhi, they are all they've been drying last 50, 60 years. People have been knocking off wetlands, ponds, tanks. And I can think of Imphal. I've been there 2-3 years ago. It's absolutely, they're just knocking off all these ponds that were very, very much part of the city. And so when a big flood hits, it will have no place to sit, right? So what I'm trying to communicate to you is the engineer is a good problem solver, but not a good problem constitutor. Problem constituting is something that historians, it's bread and butter for us. Yeah, we can tell you what is a good problem to have. Yeah, right? And so I'm making a case for that. And I do think that the systemic marginalization of the social sciences and the great damage being done to professional history by several acts of this government, it's not helpful. You're losing a valuable capacity. All right? And this will show long-term damage. Okay, and so my humble submission is a very elaborate argument that, places like JNU and various other premier social science universities, there's a very strong case to fund them and give them the democratic space to work and the freedom to grow. Because otherwise, you are going to experience a situation where you have problem solvers, which you have now, you have an overcapacity with engineers, but you have no problem constitutors. So somebody else has to walk in and tell you what your problem is, right? Okay, I don't know if it's been fairly long, but the bottom line is I'm making a strong case for the social sciences, given
totally
climate change. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I totally echo your views on bringing social sciences more into giving this whole discipline, multidisciplinary social sciences the spotlight that that is long due. So can I put it this way, that history and the allied sciences, social sciences, enable the solutions to flooding and other extreme
problem constitute. They constitute
problem
problem.
constituting. Yeah, excuse me for that.
Yeah.
To become more bottom up. I mean, the entire. Yeah. So that could ultimately yield to comprehensive solutions with respect to the entire natural events, so as to say. So, before I hand over to Dr. Arjun, also there are a couple of questions on the chat box, if you permit. So, my one last question is, what is the message that you would want to provide to the voices who have been actually dismissive of the history lessons that could help India to solve its challenges of flooding? And I will also include one more question from the chat box from the audience. She says, he or she says, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Won't historians be helpful in predicting other natural disasters such as tsunami, cyclones, etc., along with floods? And secondly, every year, city of Delhi faces increased water levels of river Yamuna, and people in the low-lying areas of the city are affected worstly. And there are so many advisories that are generated from the government that don't go, etc., etc. So this is a recurring phenomenon which engineers have failed to solve. Otherwise, it wouldn't be recurring. Do you think historians would have accurately posed the problem in this regard? So very closely associated with what you just spoke. If you could just briefly touch upon it.
Yeah, well, there are some questions which I can't really fully respond to.
Sure.
Prediction is not really at the heart of what historians really do. Okay. So we're not really, I don't think we can be terribly helpful in prediction. Okay. But insofar as we can think of plausible scenarios and feed into that process of scenario building, then we have various tools, various methodologies, various imaginations that we can convey. All right. Okay. So that's a big, I want to underline that predictability is something that the engineering world believe that the world is predictable. That there are averages that happen, and if you prepare for them, you can control. All right. Now with climate change, we are fast reaching a point of uncertainty. In fact, to predict is to basically be old-fashioned. Okay, right? We are looking at the varied plausibilities that can emerge and how to prepare for a world where we have less control. Prepare for a world where we have less control. Okay, I'm going to say something that might not be very, does not easily follow from my my talk, but it is vitally important. You know, I should say this at one level. You know, a lot of engineering, if you look at 19th century, it's about men trying to control feminine rivers. I want to use this metaphor, you know, and the belief about a lot of these men was that these rivers are predictable and it's all about control. And if you think about the Indian male patriarchal problem, it's something like that. I need to control. Why do you need to control if you can have a conversation and be attentive to the other side? Are you getting what I'm saying? Yeah. So there is something about how we have slanted certain disciplines. You know, and if you see the pictures, I used women in engineering hats and so on. We need to really get beyond a certain patriarchal masculine kind of imagination about what the world is like. There are many other ways to grapple with our realities. Yeah, okay. And I think the social science is extremely attentive to questions of democracy, questions of power, questions of responsibility, questions of actually understanding how the other side imagines and thinks, okay, wants to imagine and think, okay. Um, Social science cannot function without democracy. It cannot function without a wide range of freedoms. And I think that much of your challenges today lie in these two domains, democracy and freedom. And social sciences and history in particular are very critical ingredients and components of that way of thinking. All right, yeah. And we can save masculine patriarchal engineering, if I may say so very boldly and grandly, by actually saying that we need a kind of ability to have a feminist reading of this material world. Okay, yeah. And maybe in that lies our emancipation. Maybe in that lies our future. Yeah, right? Not a world of strong men. It's a world of understanding people. I think that is really what I think is something that social sciences and history can really brilliantly communicate. Sorry, this is a roundabout way to address that question, but I wanted to underline that this is not problem solving. We are not into the business of prediction. Yeah, look at how we are conceptualizing. That is an important arena.
Yeah, right. Certainly. And I think I could also add to what
Yeah,
you said was about the humane approach and the
yeah,
questions of parity and equity, along with
yeah,
responsibility and democracy, which social science could also
yeah,
provide in actually heralding an emancipated world.
yeah.
So thank you very much for your
Oh,
response to
welcome.
that, sir. And
No.
we have one more question, actually two
Oh,
more
okay,
questions, and I would just
okay.
put them very briefly to you. It's by Prakhar Gupta.
Okay,
Urbanization is happening at the cost of climate. Uh, so Kedarnath floods are the biggest example
right.
where changing the flow of rivers had caused the, I mean,
Yeah,
entire massacre or the
yeah,
the challenge, the disaster that
yeah,
erupted.
yeah.
As a historian, would you had recommended changing river regimes for expansion, which is also necessary, or some other way could have been devised? And also, another question is between the contrasting professionals, the engineers, and the, in fact, it's not contrasting, I believe. Your views you could provide to that also, sir. So, between the contrasting professionals, the engineers, and the historians, where according to you, the role of other stakeholders, such as the urban planners, the environment planners, elected representatives, bureaucrats, and so on, how does it factor in? On which side are they more inclined? So if I could put that
Well,
more clearly.
very quickly, let me give you the answer to
Yes.
this. You know, again, how do you start a conversation between different people and make it meaningful? It's not who should be dominant or who should win, right? How does a conversation take place where everyone gains? That is the tough part. And I'll tell you another thing. You know, there are studies showing that many of our engineers cannot write a compelling paragraph in English or any language for that matter. Yeah, the loss of language, which again is something that is central to social sciences and history, especially that language is crucial for developing conversations and ways to understand the world. Yeah, so to respond, I'm simply saying is how to make a conversation meaningful across differences. I would concentrate on that. Yeah. Now to the first question, what was the first question again? Something to do about?
Yes, it was about the Kedarnath floods as
Okay.
to, yeah.
Again, just to underline, thank you. It's a great question, but uh, and that question helps me again reiterate. Kedarnath is not a question of whether I can solve it. It's a question of how should we understand it as a problem. Was it a natural event, or was it a natural event that aggravated a long history of bad construction in that region, a long history of roads that should not have been put in those places, or a long history of lack of preparedness for an event like this? So there are many aspects to that story that needs to be brought in so that we can understand that problem in a helpful manner. We can constitute that problem in a helpful manner. If we see it only in the limited manner that, oh, we didn't have enough prediction, then that will allow us to develop in one way. But if we look at it as a combined problem of vulnerability that was woven into the system even before the event, bad construction of roads, bad housing, lack of drainage, lack of preparation, then we can see it differently, right? Then we can see it as a problem of systemic vulnerability that was built into the system, and we have to respond to that differently. Yeah, I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. I now invite Dr. Arjun. If you are there, could you please unmute and share your views?
Thank you. First,
briefly, please. We are a little out of time.
Sure. Yes. First, let me congratulate Dr. D Souza. I would say very beautiful slides, very colorful, and it was, yes, it was tough to put upon in very limited time and words, so many of things. But a few things which also come to my mind. I just thought, as an economist and also as a policy practitioner, ask you a few things. One thing I really wanted to know more about was that policy as a what is policy? Is it humiliation to politicians using science? That was something. Yes, with good science. So that was something we learned today. And but let me also since we are talking about engineering or the tool, and then as historian or social science, economics also becomes a social science. In practice, in the recent history, what we have seen that now the things, be it flood or air pollution or any that kind of climate change thing which we are witnessing now, at least South Asia has become immune, and I would say this is business as usual. Nothing. So it is now embedded in our conscience as a recent history which has been going on, and no solution so far, be it at the ground or at the top policy level. And what I was also, thinking that since most of these are led by our politicians, elected representative administration, they also belong to not per se academic social science, but do at social science. And engineers are at their disposal for metro and others. We do have engineers leading those. But as engineering, it's also like a quick fix. And because of that, what we have witnessed over the decades, that there has been a lot of rent seeking. And the administrative and the engineering, our engineering departments has, be it smart city, be it our any kind of planning, so flooding in cities, or be it in fact one figure I wanted to quote here, that almost 2/3 to 3/4 of the wastewater just go into the low-lying areas in rural areas. Similar is the case for the urban area, and we have all this drainage, mash up everything happening, and this is really business as usual. And with even our engineering departments have also become stinking, sort of, because of really this ethics and those things coming in. But having said so, if I will talk about our social sciences, they the other side feel that they are also very lethargic, so laid back, because to contextualize the problem, it takes a lot of time. So that is a dilemma which is also coming, that one is a quick fix, and there is a limited time, there is a lot of rent seeking, so a lot of devoid also. And here the things are really very slow, and one cannot know when the answer is coming. Other than that, I really wanted to touch upon the some economic parts of it, because most of the things which we are not being able to do, we justify by economic reasons, be it our budget or anything. So most of the engineering fixes we do, we go for the bottom bid or engineering type of solution. And there also we see that uh, even in South Asia, we use a lot of coal, and there are so many of other uses. And informal settlements, something for livelihood, poverty, and that really becomes as also a political economy dilemma, human right dilemma, and livelihood vis-a-vis that contestation, because most of the administration and others, the other part we see that comes in. So how do you see that, even if historians have to solve that? So do you think displacing them from there, how that problem can be contextualized in terms of, let us say, citizenship, or where do you locate that, the economic rationale of it, of things as it is happening? Because we have master plan, we have whatnot, so many of fancy documents. Now we have given biennial report to BAU, also to UN, giving that we are very much on the track. But having said so, I really also wanted to know and learn from you that so do you think this contestation, what the topic you have said really chosen today, of engineers and historians or social science, or having this thinking very particular to South Asia, or any distinct part of the world, or is this contestation also the same in the developed world? Because we as planners or others also, we can also effectively use engineers as our tool for for prosperous growth. So how do you see this contestation? Because many part of the world have done, Britishers, Germans, so many of good engineers, and a lot of innovation is coming. So yes, that was one really special question I thought to ask you and learn from you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I don't think I have too much time to answer all. You put a huge set of questions, and thank you so much. I've learned so much from them as well. Let me just quickly end this by saying, if you look at the Dutch, their engineering has embraced social sciences. All right. We are still stuck in the 19th century in many ways. Okay. Today it's our engineers must learn ethics. They must learn philosophy. They must learn a range of social sciences engagements. They must have a range of social science engagements so that we can, learn how to construct our problems correctly and helpfully. Yeah. Okay. That is my submission here. And I also am amongst those in India who worry that there are lots of efforts now to dismantle the social sciences. Okay, not just enough funding, but the context of freedoms and the context of democracy and how these universities can function to convey social sciences. Even that is being I think being put under pressure. Okay, so this is my worry, and I do think that scientists and engineers by themselves cannot be wholly be part of the solutions that we are going to of the problems that we are going to be facing in the near future. So we need, we need to get the social sciences to play a far more energetic and important role. Yeah, its marginalization is what worries me in India. Yeah, and I think there are solutions. They are part of the problem constituting exercises for a range of crises that are gripping us. That's what the heart of my presentation is. Yeah, and I hope I managed to convince some of you all. If not, call me again. All right. Okay.
Love to, sir.
So,
thank
you so
much.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to use a few seconds to thank you very, very much for Dr. Mehta and Dr. Kumar for this privilege, and I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you.
Sir,
And I
thank
love
you.
the question.
The honor is totally ours, sir. Thank you so much. And this topic itself is really, really important. And it actually requires a lot of deliberations. And
Yes.
rather proactive deliberations are needed if we have to move towards an equitable society, which is democratic, also essentially democratic in nature. So I really urge all the like-minded individuals and institutions to make their expression of how do we constitute the problem, uh, making it more vocal, and also keeping in mind that the language is also simple. The way we express and the way we try and make people understand, uh, that would also engender a lot of participation, and that would be essentially uh, deepening deepening our democratic roots. So thank you so much, sir. And it has been an honor for us to listen to you and this wonderful topic. And I'm sure this will lead to more and more thoughts and evoke more and more, or rather provoke more and more thoughts and awareness. And we'd love to have you again. And it is privilege, as I mentioned, sir. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. Bye.